Welcome to Mending Threads. This is your safe place and your stronghold for whole body wellness. This is a transformation series, mind, body, and spirit. Our efforts are to actually bring together mental health, physical health as it relates to our daily living. We're going to have with us today someone that's well known with the Women's Resource Center, and I just want to welcome you to our Imani Faith Health Initiative. Uh, do we have a special person on, Dr. Oswald Walker, who is a leader in our community? He's an educator of Black Studies and Culture. He's an associate pastor with the Madonna. Um, I always miss the name up. but listen, what I'm really trying to say, he's an author, a pastor, an educator, and a person who really understands what mind, body, spirit is, what we're talking about. So I just want to bring on Dr. Oswald Walker. Thank you. And I didn't say that he was editor of the Defender Network at all. Thank you. So welcome. Good morning. He's just well versed. And Dr. Walker, we have chosen a topic: the power of telling your story. And I know that this has a lot to do with mental health. It has a lot to do with culture, and I just want to see if you could open it up to see what the power of the story is. What is this?
So, thanks for having me, Dr. Lewis. This whole topic has been on my mind a lot recently because in my church, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, where I'm the associate pastor, October is our anniversary month, and our theme this year, celebrating 70 years, is preserving our rich historical legacy. And so I was thinking, like how does an institution, how does a movement preserve its legacy? Well, one, you have to invest in it, right? You got to give money to it, or the movement stops moving. Two, you have to do your part in your time. You've got to add to it, or again, the movement stops moving. But there's a third way, and that's by telling the story, of the movement, of how we got over, so that we can take those moments and our souls can look back in wonder and in awe and in amazement of how we got over, how we were able to overcome this and persevere through that and have the grit to go through whatever. And so telling those institutional, organizational stories is critical. But what's just as critical, and I think what people forget, is there is no institution without individuals. There is no movement without us ordinary everyday people. So it's not just about telling the story of the institution or the movement. It's about telling your story. Your story has power. Your story has literal spiritual power. And so I actually preached this past Sunday, and the scripture that I used what comes from the first Maccabees chapter 2 verse 51. And for all those Bible scholars out there, they're like, well, I ain't never heard of that book, because there's 4 books of the Maccabees, and the books of the Maccabees are not in all versions of the Bible. They're in the Jerusalem Bible, which some people call the Catholic Bible, and they're in some other versions of the Bible, but they're not in all versions, because the stories of the Maccabees, the contents of those books, are not the contents that the folk who were trying to form a particular faith, the very people who literally killed Jesus and other Hebrew leaders and revolutionaries, they were trying to fashion a faith that they could use to control people. And the book of the Maccabees is all about the people using God power and inspiration to confront and deal with the very real issues and challenges of their day and their time in the land of the living. And so it's about these people saying, God gives us the power to do for us what God gave us the power to do for ourselves. And so that's what the books of the Maccabees talk about. And I use
Well,
scripture.
you got me all excited because now, now, really, I'm truly excited. Did you hear me? My little ears were like pumping. So
Uh-oh, go ahead.
a little bit, give me a little bit because I don't think I really read the book of the Maccabees, and I'm just going to be vulnerable enough to say it right. But you're going to have to give me a little bit of it.
But I mean, that's perfectly understandable, because when our ancestors were enslaved, hell, they I mean, they already took out, so many verses and books of the Bible that would lend us to being inspired to fight against, enslavement, oppression, brutality, all those other things. So it stands to reason that a book like the first book or the second book of the Maccabees would not be in there. And so, I mean, I have my version of the Jerusalem Bible. Um,
Yes,
the cover is torn off because
I'm going to have to order.
I
I'm
use
going to
I
have to
use it
order.
I use it kind of a lot. But
Yes,
the scripture I used was First Maccabees 2 verse 51. And it says this: remember the deeds performed by our ancestors, each in their generations, and you shall win great honor and everlasting renown. And if I'm talking too much, just cut me off. But just to give you some background, so the Maccabees, that term has been used to describe this priest by the name of Mattathias and his 5 sons.
yes,
Mattathias was the high priest of this country town called Modin. So they weren't even in the big city of Jerusalem, right? They were in this country town. They were way down near West Columbia somewhere, right? Or Bay City, whatever. Uh,
yes,
so they're way back in the country. But at this time, the Greeks, who were the biggest power in the world at the time, they were going from town to town, saying, "Look, Hebrews, you have to turn your back on your God, your customs. If you don't, you will be tortured and murdered." And they were doing this. They were going from town to town, making the Hebrews, the people, Jesus's people. But this is about 200 years before Jesus was born, making them submit, bend their knee to all the Greek gods. When they get to Modin, the king's commissioner asks Mattathias, they said, "Look, we don't even have to go through all this. You're the big man in town. You bend your knee and everyone else will do the same." And Mattathias refuses. In fact, he kills the king's representative and calls his people to stand up for their God, their people. And so they're about to go to war. And the scripture that I read, Mattathias is up in age. He's about to die. He knows that the Greeks are coming to kill all of their people. He knows this.
mm-hmm.
And so with his dying words, he gives his people some advice. But what is crazy is he doesn't give them military strategy. He doesn't give them a plan B. He doesn't share with them, words of diplomacy so they could possibly talk their way out of getting killed by the Greek army that is absolutely marching towards them. Instead, he tells them, remember the deeds performed by our ancestors, each in their generations, and you shall win great honor and everlasting renown. I mean, I can actually hear the Hebrews listening to that.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, what we about to be killed, and you're telling us that we need to focus on stories, on remembering our history. What kind of sense does that make? Well, it makes a lot of sense when you recognize that Mattathias came out of the African tradition. The Hebrews were an African people, and for African people, the most revered folk in their nations, in their communities, were not the royalty, were not the people with the most money or the most fame. It was the griots. It was the storytellers. It was the people
Yes,
responsible for
mm-hmm.
telling stories and keeping the history and the culture alive. And so if you are going to survive as a people, you've got to have something that you believe in. you've got to have something that inspires and inspirits you. And it's those stories, it's our history that will give you the courage to stand up against anything that's coming your way. So Mattathias knew exactly what he was doing, because if you don't have those stories, if you don't tell those stories, you will fall victim to doubt and fear, and you won't have the guts and the grit and the determination and the courage to do whatever it is that God is calling you to
Well,
do.
God knows
Long,
I wished I had been there in that sermon. You know, you're going to, Lord, I hope you have a tape of it so we can play it. But listen, oh, Pastor, Dr. Walker, let me tell you this. You are so, you got to tell me more of it because it relates to just what I just told you before the store, that November 18th. Let me tell you, it's bringing pastors together to say what we need to say. We've already started intergenerational storytelling. You're so timed, and it makes me feel good that I'm walking in step with what you're saying, and it makes me, it enriches the whole reach when someone else is saying that. It lets you know that you're not off the beaten path.
yeah, well, spirit is involved in what we're doing. So
Yes,
even when we're not coordinating, we're still
yes,
coordinating, right?
yes.
And so, yeah, stories are the keepers of culture. Stories connect people.
Go back to
Stories.
that a little bit. Go back. Wait a minute.
Okay.
So then get back to the story and then come back. The,
So
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 mhm,
so, so Mattathias tells his people, remember those deeds, remember the stories. But what I find interesting is Mattathias doesn't tell them to focus on those big stories of the Hebrew people. He doesn't focus on, remember we were enslaved in Egypt, and then Moses led us out. He doesn't talk about when the waters parted in the Red Sea and they were able to cross over. He doesn't focus on those big stories. He talks about individual stories, individual people who just allowed themselves to do, you know, allowed God to work through them. He says, was not Abraham tried and found faithful? Was that not counted as making him just? Joseph, in his time of distress, maintained the law and so became Lord of Egypt. Phinehas, our father, in return for his burning fervor, received a covenant of everlasting priesthood. Joshua, for carrying out his task, became judge of Israel. And he goes on and on. He mentions Caleb and David and Elijah and Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, or the three in the
yeah,
fiery flame.
mhm,
Daniel. He just goes on and on and on. But he's just making my point. Your story, my story, our story is just as powerful and important as those big stories of the civil rights movement and the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But what about Joanne Robinson, that sister who birthed the idea of the whole Montgomery bus boycott? What
yeah,
about Queen Mother Moore? What about Gloria Richardson? That sister. I don't know if you remember that. There's a famous photo from the civil rights movement where you got these white police officers and they got these bayonets with these swords on them, and
yes,
she's giving them the side eye and she's pushing the sword out of the way, and it's a powerful picture. That
yes,
sister was a fighter on the battlefield for our people for generations. She just passed away like a year ago, I think.
hmm,
But it's those stories, just the story about, whenever I talk to you, you talk about growing up in your grandmother's house and how that impacted and shaped your life. And my mother, this is October now, but my mother passed away in September, 9 years ago. Norma Jean Walker. Her name may not be in somebody's history books, but
yes.
without her, I'm not here.
That's right. That's
and
right.
and so those stories are just so critically important, because they allow us to hold. They're the keepers of the culture. They connect people, they connect generations, they speak to our heart and move us. People that do great things, I mean, people that are in the history books, right, that are that um that evidence this incredible courage, they don't do it out of their rational mind because they read something, oh, and that made so much
Yes.
sense, let me do it. They do it because something spoke to their heart. It
Yes.
spoke to their heart of hearts, and that's what stories do. And so I was trying to challenge the folk I was preaching to. You got to write your story down, or you've got to record your story, because you got some miracle stories. You've got those moments in your life where when you can look back in wonder, you look back in awe and in amazement at how God worked wonders in, through, and around you. Your words can be scripture for somebody else, for your children, your children's children,
Mhm.
children you don't even know generations from now. But stories are just that powerful. And as an African people, we've always celebrated the power of story. I apologize for getting all hyped. I know you
No,
didn't want
no,
me to do
you're
that or
doing.
go there.
It is
That,
that,
that's what
and I'm
stories, that's
saying
what our history does.
yes. That's what history. And just to share your story, the thing that you go through, we're doing it now. We just taped our first intergenerational. Somebody donated 5. Uh-oh. Somebody donated. Somebody has recorded. Somebody has a duplicate um, sound on. Okay, then. So somebody donated a small amount of funds for us to do storytelling. So what's sent out is a little form for every church to have somebody in their church to do a story about how they overcome. But their goal is to get something from the generation before that help them, and then what they've gone through and what are they sending to the next generation or sharing it with another generation with us. And just that's to bring people together, and also look at the secrets. So you'll get a form. Okay, everybody's going to get a form that we can give, and you can pass it around. But I see what we're speaking about is so exciting. um, and I want to know more, and I'm sure we have with us Dr. Guyton.
There he
uh,
is. There he is. I see him.
There he is, Dr. J.D. Guyton, and something is recording duplicate. Whoever it is has to turn the sound off. Okay, it's something about a duplicate sound that has to be turned off. Okay, then. Okay, so if you can't, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell your story, and that's going to be something. But he said he had a story. He's going to take 5 minutes of time to tell a story, and then we're going to look at what that story can do, telling your story. But you were saying something about what we don't know, of the incredible information, not only about the people you mentioned, that sometimes we want to look at those unknown stories. We want to do a
Yes.
little series, if you can, like have a cameo of unknown stories, not familiar stories. But I wanted to go back to what you just said before Dr. Guyton comes on, um, from his Winning Wellness program, um, to see what happened when the people began to relish and saw significance in their stories.
The thing that happened. So remember, Modine was that country town. They were just a whole bunch of a holy people and farmers. They were not military men and women. They were farmers and priests, and they had the most powerful army in their known world heading their way. And what ended up happening was, because they were so inspired and connected to their stories and connected to their people, sometimes you just need to be reminded of what you can do and what your people have done. And when you read those stories, that's why we get so fired up when we read stories about our heroes and sheroes, because we read them and we say, oh, okay, if they can do it, we can do it. If we did it then, we can do it now. And so as history tells us, These ragtag farmers and holy people ended up fighting the Greek army to a standstill. They fought for 25 years, and they eventually had to, what do you call it, a truce after 25 years, which was amazing when you think about the fact that, again, this was considered the most powerful army in their known world, and this is just some ragtag group. But because they believed and because they were inspirited, and they were able to 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 go toe to toe with the most powerful force, at least in their part of the world. And I should add this though, because I was saying how the books of the Maccabees aren't in most Bibles, but the names of Mattathias's 5 sons, when you look at the names of the 12 disciples, it reminds you of how people that we hold in great renown, how black folk do. We name our children after our grandfather or this person or some person who did something great in our history. That's exactly what they did. Most of Jesus's disciples had names that were the exact same names of the Maccabees, because for the people in when Jesus walked the earth 200 years after the Maccabee story, the Maccabees were still revered. They were the heroes. Jesus and his people looked at the Maccabees like we look at sports figures or we look at entertainers. Those were the folk who they wanted to emulate, and they wanted to be like, they wanted to have that kind of courage and that kind of commitment for their God, that they were willing to stand up to whatever threats came their way so that they could show their God and their people what side that they stood on. So it's an important story in the whole Christian story that unfortunately we just don't know a whole lot about.
Well, I'm going to sure try to know a lot more about it. Thanks to you. I really am. So, Dr. Guyton, I know that you heard, you were backstage, and I'm sure that you heard, but I know that you're muted. But please pay attention that you don't have on a duplicate recording phone or device with your computer. I think that's what it was. Okay, then. So if you could share, we're talking about the importance of helping other people or ourselves in sharing stories. Can you share with us the meaning in one of the stories that you one else can hear?
I definitely greetings and great day, and I'm so excited to see my friend Dr. Walker. And man, just to hear him, uh, how do you say it? I mean, just build us up with all that amazing information. And two, after this conversation that we're having, I know my life will never be the same. And as he expounded on the necessity of telling the story, I tell a story about my life, right? And and I'm still meeting me. And one thing that I'd like to say, as we tell our story, and then there's the story before the glory, we find ourselves in a situation to where we may be doing some things that we didn't do. But what caused us to get to where we are? Stories that we've heard, stories that are now written in the on the tablets of our heart because of heroes in our life. My dad was my hero, and I tell you, they asked me, "Well, who are you?" And the first thing I'll tell them, my dad was from Alabama. My mother was from Arkansas. They met in Mississippi and moved to Texas, and I went to ground, and we're from the South. Now, I was named after my grandfather. His name was F.D. Guyton, Pickens County, Alabama, in 1884. And I remember one day that was just so amazing. Dad usually goes to Arkansas when he would get some time off, but one day he decided that he needed to take us to Alabama, which we had never been. We'd always go to Arkansas. And I remember going to Pickens County, Alabama. And there was some unique things that happened there. And one thing we discovered why Dad never wanted to go back to Alabama is because he was from Pickens County, but the closest town to Pickens County was Carrollton, Alabama. And in Carrollton, Alabama, and you can Google this, there's a story about the legend of the Carrollton County Courthouse, where this individual was falsely hung because of what someone said. And in that, when they hung him, it began to let people know that you cannot be God in other people's life or where you can make judgment. I'm putting that in my own words. But the individual that was hung, and this was when my dad was a teenager. He was born in 1923, but when he was a teenager, and they saw this take place. But what manifested was this. After they hung this individual, his face and the image of his face to this day still remains in that courthouse window. I was there a few weeks ago, and his face was still in the courthouse window. But before that, it was 50 years prior to that when my dad took us to Pickens County, Alabama. And I remember our cousins took us and showed us that. And I'm looking at this window and I see this face in this courthouse window with the agony on his face from that rope noosed around his neck and hung for no, for not the reason that they said. It wasn't right for them to hang him anyway. So there were so many stories that my dad did not tell, but that one story I began to understand why. And there are other stories that are coming out now because I had the opportunity to go back and stand in that place where I stood 50 years ago. And I heard a message that literally changed my life. And I can tell the story about that message then that still has my attention to my life every day now. And it was about the second coming of Jesus and the events that will take place leading up to that event that will take place. But the thing that I do know when remembering some of the things that was told in that story, how we began to see them things manifest now, the great falling away. People are lovers of selves more than lovers of God. People uh, where they could care less about you, more about them, the selfishness, the hate. And then they say that they love you. They say that they love God. They say that they walk in the truth and in the light. But yet at the same time, do you see that love that the Father has said that we are to walk in, that we are to give our lives, to live our lives so they could begin to see not us, but to see Him through us as they see us. And standing in that place that I stood when I was 15 years old, now I'm 67.
That what
And
you're
to
saying,
see,
Dr. Guyton, is something that is so powerful. What you're saying. So the thing is in terms of storytelling. I mean, I can hear it, but in terms of your son, in terms of the other persons, how would you share? What would you share in that experience? Just the story itself is powerful, But what would you like to share the impact that it has on you and what you glean from it while you're sharing your story? Because we know that there's some important things, and just share the catharsis, just to share it and open up your heart releases the emotions, and then it also gives direction. But I want to see what you would do, because I know that I want to hear Doc Walker's comment because he has to leave in about 5 or 7 minutes. Yes.
Truth that goes beyond the facts, truth that will set you free. And we become to know. Well, let me tell you this to kind of to condense it. God is concerned about who we are not. How do you become who you are and who you know to be until you are able to recognize what is truth, what is real? And it's not until you are able to have something to compare that with. I use this illustration when it comes to what I do as a
So you're frozen a little bit, but I'm going to keep while he's frozen. I'm going to talk about what he's saying in terms of
is.
story.
So
Tell
you
me.
say that's good, but I tell you that is not good. You never felt what good feels like until you had this treatment that gives you a standard that will bring truth, that you have something to compare it to. And then now here we are to be able to go to that place of truth that goes beyond the fact. I tell my son, my dad was my hero.
Dr. Guyton, just thank. I would like to thank Dr. Oswald Walker, editor of the Defender newspaper, and also pastor at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, that he has to go prepare for a class. So he told us earlier that he would need to leave a little bit earlier. And so the power of storytelling, he's given us some tidbits and some information and direction of leadership to follow. Dr. Guyton and I will look at his story and relate it to the power of storytelling, and follow up with that. Thank you
And
so much.
I'm gonna let y'all keep talking and keep doing great things. I gotta go,
Okay.
but thank you. Good
Thank
to
you
see you
for being
both.
here this morning, and we'll
All
look
right,
forward
y'all.
to that. Thank you
All
now.
right. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye. Okay. So, Dr. Guyton, you're muted right now. You're muted.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, Dr. Lewis, I see I'm not muted now. So what a story will do for you, it would allow you to recognize who you are and who you're not based on some of the things that you've been through. I listen to stories that the elders tell every Thursday. We go over to Shade Community Center. They have what they call the Elder Circle. And as we hear these elders begin to tell their stories from decades and decades ago and decades of who influenced them, and there's something that we call DNA, but not talking so much about the scientific term of DNA, but that DNA where we receive God, that divine natural ability that God gives us to do that what He's called us to do. And that DNA comes from those that have gone before us. And I met, okay, let me put it like this. I began to hear me say some things that I never heard me say. And in turn, I began to meet a me I never knew. But that me that I talk about is the guy that I am in. So what I'm doing now in life, I'm processing those stories that I heard, that I was told. And I was in St. Louis a few weeks ago, and my niece told me something based on my ancestry that literally blew my mind. We talked about Black Wall Street. Now, There were three Black Wall Street, but we only, most of us emphasize what took place in Tulsa. But the first Black Wall Street was in Jackson Ward in Richmond, Virginia. And that began to set the standard for what was known and put forth as Black Wall Street, where no matter what we as a people went through, we learned how to thrive way beyond surviving. And so I call it how we live that thrive life. So, you're familiar with Madam C.J. Walker.
Mhm.
She was the one they began to launch where we were in slavery and living at the worst of things, and we began to thrive, and we began to thrive, and we began to thrive. And that was built in us. But it was those stories like that that we were told and that we were able to then begin to see the truth that goes beyond the fact, because there are those that will not tell our story. And we hear that all the time. And then, how our history is so hard to, or how they kept our history from us, let's put it like that.
Dr. Guy,
Yes, ma'am.
the whole idea, can you mute just from, okay. The whole idea is that we followed them not telling our story, and that we stop telling our stories in order to accommodate to what other people wanted us to do. So we no longer, for many years, would very few would tell the story, would tell what they'd learned, or would share with young. I hear statements like, "I don't want my children to know what I went through. I don't want to color their mind. I don't want them to have to deal with that." So there are many reasons why I think we don't tell our stories. But I think, just in lieu of time, we want to look at the importance of really telling what you're talking about, the importance of really giving lineage to a story.
Okay, the most important thing about telling that story, or continuing to tell the story, would be legacy. And I believe that we're required to leave a legacy. And in that legacy is so much more than just, materialism. It's about who we are so we can continue to be who we are. Case in point, in my family, my son is after me, he was the only namesake that was in our family. August the 31st, a new namesake come. He just father of his son. And now we have a story, that we have a legacy that we have to live, a legacy that we have to prepare for, that our name would be around here another 100 years, another 100 years. There are civilizations, there are people now that do not exist. And we do not want to be one of those, or be that type of casualty where we do not exist. So we must tell our story because of legacy. And that's my comment on that. This is why I tell the story. This is why I believe you should tell the story. And that legacy where we'll hear the truth, and that's the truth that not only will set us free, but to allow us to become who we are so we can recognize whose we are.
Well, thank you. This is so enriching to really talk about, because this is something that we talk about in our circles, but we really don't talk about the importance that that this legacy building, or I call it wisdom building, look at, that even for mental health, even the sharing of a story connects with another generation, but even just the catharsis of it brings on better mental health, because it even helps us to think. But then when we connect with someone else, and it happened today, I was sharing something with Doc Walker, and all of a sudden we connected and we could see what it all meant for us while we were talking. You see, and so one of the things that brings on a connection instead of separate. During the COVID, there was a disconnect, and we found that that had a big impact, particularly on certain cultures, because we were joining cultures, and therefore the disconnect brought on that we couldn't talk as much with each other, and we couldn't see each other to connect and communicate and share our stories. So I just wanted to say, I want to thank you for coming on, Dr. Guyton. If it's one last thing you would like to leave with our audience as we sign off about storytelling, or what they need to do. We will be videotaping storytelling. That's what we're doing now. We just finished our first videotaping. Anybody interested in joining us, all they have to do is to go online to wrc-houston.com. But let's hear what Dr. Guyton is going to leave us with for our next week.
In leaving a legacy, it will allow us to recognize who we are so we can know who we're not. I am not just an accident or incident. I am somebody. God has a great plan for my life. He has a great plan for all of our lives. He says this, and then I'm finished. He said that I have put my treasure in earthen vessels. So the thing that you were able to reveal is that you're not average, you're not ordinary, you are extraordinary. And to begin to see and recognize who you are, recognize whose you are, so you'll see why you are here and do the things that are necessary for you to leave a legacy for that generation that comes behind. Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Idea of what we're speaking about when you talk. Thank you so much. I do want to say thank you to Dr. Oswald Walker for this morning, from the Defender newspaper, and also associate pastor of the Shrine of Black Madonna, and also Dr. F.D. Guyton from Winning Wellness. And I do want to say that we start our wellness program, whole body wellness program, on November the 4th at Real Life Christian Church. If it's out on Alameda Genoa Road, that will be posted on the website today for sign up. Anybody, and I do want to say that Dr. Guyton will be there, and he will be teaching not only a little bit of spiritual development and wellness, but he will be engaging in how you can join your spiritual self with foot healing, particularly if you have diabetes. So if you feel tired and you're a little bloated and your little feet are fat and those kinds of things, head on out to Real Life Christian Church on Alameda Genoa Road, November the 4th. You can go on our website this evening, sign up for wrc-houston.com for any of the on-site and hybrid wellness programs that we have. We look forward to that. Mental health coaching, same thing. And you will hear a lot more of the webinars that are coming up. So I want to thank you, Dr. Guyton, for being here today. And I'm also thanking Dr. Walker. And I want to sign off by saying, renew your beliefs, rebuild faith, reconnect with families and communities. For it's not the circumstances we meet, it is the manner in which we respond that determines health, happiness, and success. God willing, I'll see you all same place, same time, same station next week. Thank you.